So since I've been in my room a lot, not that it's any different than any of the rest of the time, but I've had lots of time for thoughts to arise. Lots of thinking that arises when there's not so much distraction of doing to do. And more moments of time for meditation. But I'm thinking about dealing with thoughts, working with thoughts in both ways of time of formal practice and in all the rest of our lives. And in practice, I think in those moments when thinking predominates, that it's possible to have mindfulness clear there and silent awareness that I am thinking. And there was one piece of advice that I found helpful. I think that it was Joseph Goldstein who said it, when he mentioned that for the purpose of meditation, nothing is particularly worth thinking about. And you can look at that in different ways. For the purpose of meditation, nothing is particularly worth thinking about. Does that mean you think about nothing or you just don't think about anything? I think it's more like, well, what he said, nothing is particularly worth thinking about. That thoughts come and go as they wish, and the meditator doesn't need to become involved with the thoughts. And we're really not interested in engaging in the content of our thoughts. Mindfulness of thinking is simply recognizing that we're thinking. And in meditation, when thoughts are subtle and in the background, or when random thoughts pull us away from awareness of the present, and all we have to do is resume mindfulness of breathing. But I notice when my preoccupations with thoughts is stronger than my ability to let them go very easily, then I redirect mindfulness to being clearly aware that thinking is occurring. And oftentimes these strong bouts of thinking are fueled by identification and preoccupation with thoughts, by clearly observing the thinking as thinking. I can step outside of that field of identification, and thinking oftentimes softens to a calmer, more unobtrusive stream. That's why I like to think of it as sometimes like gauze, just floating by or floating in air. And sometimes thinking can be strong and compulsive, even while we're aware of it. And when this happens, one approaches to notice how the thinking affects the body. Coming back into the body, the first foundation of mindfulness. How thinking affects the body, physically and energetically. Sometimes it causes pressure in the head or tension in the forehead, tightness in the shoulders, or a higher pitched buzzing as if the head is filled with 1,000 bees, which I think is different than tinnitus, which mine sounds like a whole lot of crickets, actually. And the mindfulness can feel these sensations of tightness and pressure, or whatever else we discover. And to be caught up in the story of these preoccupying thoughts is really easy. But if we begin to feel the physical sensation of thinking, then we're beginning to bring attention to the present moment rather than the storyline of the thoughts. It's the present moment of how it feels in the body. So we go away from following the thoughts as something abstract that's preoccupying us, and we can come to the present moment in the body. And sometimes there's a particular theme that keeps on reappearing in my thinking. I'm sure it happens to you too. And most likely it's triggered by a strong emotion. And in that case, sometimes, no matter how many times we recognize and that it's a repeated thought or concern, and we come back to the breath, sometimes the concern is liable to keep reappearing if the associated emotion isn't recognized. So, I mean, for example, people who plan a lot, they often find that planning thoughts arise out of apprehension. And if the fear is not acknowledged, it will become a factory of new planning thoughts. So if there's a repetitive thought pattern, and we see if we can discover an emotion associated with it, and then practice mindfulness of the emotion, we can ground ourselves in the present moment, in the emotion itself. And when we acknowledge the emotion, often the thought that it engenders will cease. So I've had lots of opportunity while I've been in my 15 square foot area between here and the bathroom, except for when I go down to take a walk outside, to notice what happens with thinking, because especially since you know me, you know that I tend towards sleepiness as soon as I close my eyes and follow my breath kind of puts me to sleep, and then I wake up in delusion a little bit later and kind of start over again. But, and so as a result, I might purposefully pay attention to my thinking because it keeps me from wandering off into tiredness. But if I'm lost in a thought process, it's really much better to constantly come back to the body, this very body, sitting on the cushion, the sense of gravity, the touch point. And, sometimes people think that the point of meditation is to stop thinking and to have a silent mind. I mean, this does happen occasionally, but it's not necessarily the point of meditation. Thoughts are an important part of our life, and mindfulness practice isn't supposed to be a struggle against them. We can benefit more by being friends with our thoughts than by regarding them as an unfortunate distraction. So in mindfulness, we're not stopping thoughts as much as overcoming any preoccupations we have with them. But mindfulness is also not about thinking about things. It's not a discursive observation of our life in all of its aspects. So it's in those moments when thinking predominates that mindfulness arises and is the clear and silent awareness that we are thinking. And so just feeling the sensations of tightness or pressure or whatever we discover when we pull our attention away from the thinking but into the body. Thoughts are a huge part of our lives, and we spend a lot of time inhabiting the cognitive world of stories and ideas. Mindfulness doesn't stop the thinking, but it helps prevent us from compulsively following thoughts that have appeared. And this in turn helps us become more balanced so that our physical, emotional, and cognitive sides all work together as a whole. I was reminded today when I went to a website for one thing and I came upon an article of Ajhan Sucitto. I'm not sure when it was written. It doesn't really say the date on the article. It's actually, I think, a recording that's been translated to writing of one of his talks. And he talks about having lived and practiced in the West and being a Westerner himself. And the theme of practicing to be good enough. Because the Western mind is so acclimatized to ideals and concepts and theories, partly because we live in, a performance-driven ethos, all of our societies, really. And that makes, as we have seen just in our lifetime, for rapid development in terms of externals and technology, technological advancements, but it's poor results in terms of the sense of relationship and inner peace. And most of the problems that our societies face are around either a lack of social cohesion, as he talks about, or a lack of inner self-worth. We don't feel a part of a group of shared values, and we get lost with a sense of personal value. And we also have a strong performance ethic to compete. Like, there's only number one, the best team, the best player, the brightest star, the strongest, the fittest, the prettiest, or the wisest. It's kind of like we saw in the Olympics. The first person to have a nervous breakdown is the winner. I mean, not really, because finally a few people decided to claim their mental health as more important than winning. Of course, they kind of ended up winning later anyway, but this is, the direction that things tend to go in. There's a lot of driven sense to achieve excellence, and value is awarded to the greatest achievers, not as a basic sense of mutual respect. And even on a spiritual plane, he talks about how we get driven to prove that we're good enough, that we have to achieve some special state in order to be free of the nagging sense of not good enough. Something's wrong with me. And it's easy to do. The sky's the limit in terms of the ideals of absolute purity and absolute wisdom and refined concentration and enlightenment. Compared with those ideas, it's easy to feel that one isn't good enough. Not really pure enough, not committed enough, not concentrated enough, definitely not mindful enough. Or we don't have enough samadhi, not enough kindness, not enough anything really, apart from doubt. There's plenty of that. But there's no way that you can grow the mind if your mind is hampered by doubt and negativity. So the point is, without claiming that I'm flawless and, don't need to learn or to make an effort, how do I get the feeling of inner worth that supports my practice? So it's helpful to review what the aim of Dhamma practice is. When the Buddha says, make an effort to realize the unrealized, we can assume that this is we might assume that this is another kind of, performance drive. Make an effort to realize the unrealized. But it depends on how we see that. But the aim of the practice is to release the mind from suffering and from stress. The path and how we get there is nitty-gritty. It might sound like a good goal, but it's a nitty-gritty path. And it's accompanied by wisdom, by deep knowing. It has to entail being able to be present with whatever arises in consciousness. What else is there to know? That's all we know, is what conditioned things, conditioned by our mind, the conditions that arise. We can be present with whatever arises in consciousness. And seeing clearly that arises and passes away. It can be a bodily experience, a thinking experience, a heart or a feeling experience. That's all we have. And that's what we're walking around with. Bodily experienced thinking experience. Heartfelt experience. A lot of the time the head is somewhere, the body is somewhere else. And then the heart is mumbling, I don't feel so good. There's something wrong. So there must be something wrong with me. But not feeling so good as a state of being is because of this state of being pulled apart. Maybe resolving that has to be at least a part of the solution to help bring ourselves back together from these particles of the body being separate from the mind, being separate from the heart, and becoming whole and staying connected is a matter of relating to our head, our bodies, our hearts, in a balanced and peaceful way. Things are like this now. That's what we say to ourselves. This is the way things are right now. Even as I'm feeling sick or not feeling so great, or sometimes things are confusing. Can I go downstairs yet? Can I take off my mask to eat? Those are just the piddly things. But sometimes in our minds, we feel confused. And if we relate to that experience for what it is, as a condition, and not as something that we are, that's a way to be at peace. A way that has clarity and freedom. And on the other hand, even when things aren't that bad, we can notice that the tendency is to identify with what's happening and then want it to be another way. either to last longer or to change into something else. So rather than relating to experience as it is, we tend to react to it. And because of that, there's a sense of me having the disagreeable or me separated from the agreeable. And consequently, there are feelings of loss and inadequacy, and they can seem to be very present when one is sick and not quite so clear-minded and not quite so distracted. And generally the way it happens is that there's a resistance to feeling uncomfortable through physical pain, or embarrassment, or grief, or fear, or uncertainty. And so I go out of the heart and into my head. And with that, the agitation of the uncomfortable feeling and the avoidance of it gets translated into, I've got to do something. I've got to be something. I have to do something so that other people will give me the message that I'm okay. But I don't know what I have to do. And I can't ask them what I have to do because that would prove that I'm not okay. So I have to keep busy, and I'm very good at keeping busy. Meanwhile, the body is struggling along underneath, and awareness of the whole process is shut down or impaired by the agitation that's arising in the mind. And because of this, I'm not really aware of where I am. And then I sort of rush around to get somewhere else. And a lot of times that's what people are doing, rushing to get somewhere else and then rushing to get back again. And in this rush, there's no time to be feeling anything or inquiring into our actions because we're too busy. And this is pretty normal, isn't it? This is business. This is high performance. This is sport. This is the programming that we're in at this particular time. And we're attracted to fantasies, movies and video games, and that aren't happening to real bodies in real time. We don't want to be with the things as they are. We want action or a buzz or the sense of getting away from it all, the fantasy glow. What would it be like to be, a superhero or something from movies that we tend to watch? We know we can't live up to any of those kind of standards or standards in fashion magazines, and, nobody can. We already know the photos are airbrushed. And even now, there's so many apps that you can get to make you look like you have lots of beautiful makeup on. So you see these particularly young girls post things on Instagram, and they've done it all through an app that gives them, 3 different ways to wear their makeup and wear their mascara and their eyeliner. I can only imagine what it's like for people dating these days on dating sites, because you can doll up your appearance and then all of a sudden you meet somebody in person. So, the problem mostly is that we orient through the thinking faculty. And for this faculty, absolutes and ideals are easy. We can think of infinity, even though it's not something we'll ever see or hear or touch or smell or taste. We can think of terms of absolute right and wrong. We can conceive of the perfect person and the perfect society. What we can't conceive of in any clear and definite way is what is good enough. The thinking mind doesn't really grasp at that one, and that's why it's important. It's only realizable through the heart faculty, where there isn't guilt, there isn't doubt or craving to be something, conceit. The heart can be liberated from the shadow and nagging of inner doubt when we can start to let things be good enough. Good enough is about balance. That's why it's so helpful just to come into the body, in the body's own terms, whatever they are. Not the body in terms of any self or other comparisons where I can kind of say, oh, she looks better than me, or she's taller than I am, or she's slimmer than I am. But when I come into the body in mindfulness of the body, and I feel the sense of being solid, the earth element, I can feel the sense of warmth and vitality, brightness. There's the fire element, that's that vitality and brightness. And I can feel a sense of movement, of pushes and shifts, the air element within the body. And the air element most often is felt in the breath. And that's what pushes the earth element. And so we get a sense of everything being cohesive in the body. That the arm sensations are connected to the chest sensations, and this cohesion, this kind of water element. So we have all of these. And that's what we get to come into when we come into the body, the various elements. The balance in the body comes through the practice of mindfulness of the body. We can use breathing, not so much a breath, but the rhythmic sensation of breathing, which travels through the whole body to be the guide. And eventually we can arrive at a sense of harmony. That means balancing, flowing, embracing, beginning to put softness around those hard edges that we notice in our bodies, the tightness in our shoulders. It's about taking time to breathe through the painful places in our body, realizing that even if my eyebrows are tense, that's going to be a restriction of some kind. The effects that the emotions and the nervous energy, because it's plugged into the same nervous system as the body. So this begins to affect the emotions. Balance in the body puts us at ease more psychologically. So as we begin to heal the physical or the somatic body, we naturally touch into the emotional or psychological body, and this is our relational sense. It's not a particular emotion any more than a sensation is the bodily sense. And it's not a lack of emotion. Emotions travel through or get stuck in the emotional body. This emotional body is our willingness to be affected by or to be with something. How am I with this feeling? How am I with this thought? Am I alert? Am I frightened? Am I enjoying it? Am I hungry for it? Am I resisting it? At the place where we become aware of a thought, memory, physical feeling, or emotion, what's happening at that place in our bodies? And that's where we develop the heart of intelligence. Through this media of goodwill and compassion, appreciation of what is good or peaceful, and equanimous acceptance. We have to be willing, and willing is a basic sense of goodwill, metta. It doesn't mean, dolloping some sentiment onto something. It means that I'm willing to be here with this in an open way. That's the bottom line. Sometimes I feel very full with the painful. With goodwill then becomes compassion. That kindness turns into compassion. And that when kindness meets with the agreeable, then that's mudita, or enjoyment, appreciative joy. It's like you're congratulating someone for their success, but you're not claiming it as your own. And then equanimity is that real emotional balance where the good and the bad, it's like that, but you're not claiming that as yourself. As if I have the most equanimity of anyone I know. That immediately substitutes empathy for compassion and conceit that sets up a sense of self, and then suffering comes out of that. With this true heart intelligence, we're willing to be with our mind states in an empathic way, but we can determine not to add more of its passion and its stories. Empathy that requires a certain detachment. And if we get involved with the mood or train of thought, well, then we start to take sides and we start to hang on to this and resist that and create a tension between right and wrong. On the other hand, what makes us most whole and balanced and generates the least suffering is if I don't hang on to the good stuff. I don't fight with the bad stuff. Because if there's a hanging on to the good stuff, then there's a favoring of that, and then comes the sense that I am this and I've got that, and so in comes inflation and conceit again, and the balance is lost, and crash, the opposite happens again, and I've blown it. And so good enough is about not doing things that it's about not doing things that you can't feel that good about. But if you can't live with integrity, that's going to cause inner division and self-deception. So good enough is about our ethics and our intentions. The Buddha said that there were 3 basic attitudes or motivating principles ill will, kindness. Well, there's harmlessness, non-harming, gentleness, and simplicity of needs. He said, if my mind is motivated towards harmlessness, is that for my welfare? For other people's welfare? Does this lead me to nibbana and out of suffering? The answer would be yes. Then, when my mind is motivated towards not getting angry or dismissive or cutting things off, and when my mind is motivated towards simplicity, letting go of what I don't need, personal modesty, are these for my welfare, for other people's welfare? And do they lead to freedom? Yes. Then I'll develop these. And that's what we try to do. Harmlessness, turning away from actions that cut off ethical or empathic senses. So we commit less acts of violence. We have less thoughts of someone else is the enemy. Our hearts are naturally empathic. And it's the same with gentleness. So our practice is one of being as conscientious, clear, and honest as we can. And not create some huge, incredible standard of goodness. But knowing that good enough means that we check, am I doing what I feel I can do with my capacity to do good? Am I doing something that's deliberately of ill will, deliberately nasty, stupid, so to speak? Is my energy going into violating others or not? Trashing other people or not? Trashing myself or not? Noticing that this isn't appropriate behavior. I had to stop myself quite a few times analyzing my appropriate behavior when my partner and I made agreements that we would wear masks since I'm during this COVID time period. And when he's out of the house and over in his office, I want to go downstairs and not wear my mask. You know, it'll only be a couple minutes. All I have to do is, run down to the kitchen and get something and run back up. And I'm a rebellious person, so I would do that. But I had to really think and realize how much the practice has influenced me in thinking about the other person and in realizing, this was an agreement that we made, and I'm going to keep this agreement, and it's also for his well-being, as well as my well-being ethically and his well-being physically. And so, I put my mask on just to go down to the refrigerator to get something and bring it back up, and I didn't want to do that every single time. And so far, I've done pretty good. I really stop myself when I have a habituated activity of wanting to have my way and just go do it. He's not around, so it doesn't really matter. But first the agreement, and then his health, and then there's the pressure it would have on my mind if I did it anyway, and the joy that it brought my mind to have this ethical agreement and follow through on it. And so as you can see, all of this time in my bedroom has had me thinking about thoughts and ethics and the joys, really, of the homage, taking homage in the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha, and in the joy of the precepts. So I think I've probably talked a lot. So I am going to thank you for listening to the Dhamma and have great appreciation for us being able to meet, never knowing what I'm really going to talk about. And I'm going to turn my speaker back on so I can hear you.